All right, we're just waiting for people to filter in right now. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference. We're excited to welcome new participants as well as those of you who were able to attend our conference in the past. We hope you were able to attend the sessions last week, but if you missed them or wish you could see another breakout panel that's happening right now, no problem. The presentations are recorded and will be available on our conference website. I'm Angela Bearwolf, and I'm happy you are here for this breakout session, Transformative Justice in Stress Schools. On behalf of the Planning Committee for the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference, I ask that you join me in acknowledging that our University of Wisconsin-Madison campus here on the shores of Wonkshik Homika resides within the sacred homeland of the Ho-Chunk people, a place they call Dejop. As the reach of the university extends to the far corners of our state, we also respectfully recognize the inherent sovereignty of the 12 First Nations of Wisconsin. Whether you are watching from this land of the 12 nations or you are more distant, we encourage you to learn about the history of the land you are on. As social workers, we have a duty to look critically at the role our profession has played in the attempted cultural genocide and destruction of Indigenous families, such as was the aim of boarding schools in this state and across the continent. This conference is rooted in critical reflection on our work as social workers. Our goal is to bring clarity about the past, but also to challenge and inspire us to all move into action in our work in communities once the conference is over. We hope this conference provides space for critical reflection, humility, and openness, which will allow us all to reflect, to hear and tell truths, and move toward action and transformation to support Indigenous rights, cultural equity, and racial equity. With acknowledgement and gratitude, we move forward today in our journey. A few details before we get started. The presentation is being recorded and will be available on our conference website at a later date. We know that many of you are curious about the CEUs you registered for, and you are all set. So to access this presentation, you were required to provide your name and email, and this allows us to verify your attendance. You will get CEUs for this presentation, which will be distributed by email in the coming weeks. Your cameras and microphones will remain muted. We have a Q&A feature where you can submit questions for our presenters. Please know that due to the large volume of attendees, we will not be able to get to all questions submitted. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of them. Dr. Damita Brown is an artist, writer, activist, and community-based educator. Her education and research focus on understanding and transforming power is on understanding and transforming power. She holds a doctorate in history of consciousness from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Brown is also a dedicated mediator and mediation instructor. She serves as the co-executive director of Flywheel Skillshare, which promotes the use of skill sharing to create sustainable alternatives to structural oppression. Dr. Brown leads the Abolitionist Restorative Justice Workshop, which has been presented to hundreds of people. She created the Community Lab for Intentional Practice and the Transformative Action Network, which offers resources, practical skills, and community building opportunities for those committed to the development of effective strategies for dismantling racism and other forms of oppression. Savion Castro is a native of Beloit and Madison, Wisconsin, where he graduated from La Follette High School and UW-Madison and earned a scholarship from the People Program and a degree in sociology. He is currently the vice president of the Madison Metropolitan School District, an instructor for First Wave Art Scholarship, and a master's student in education psychology and learning analytics. Alexis Gardner is a La Follette High School graduate who has participated as a leader in restorative justice freshman year high school. She has deep experience with restorative justice philosophy, circle facilitation, and connecting with youth and families. She currently serves the community as a restorative justice practitioner and coordinator within both schools and community. Lorrie Hurckes has been with Flywheel Skillshare, formerly known as Dane County Time Bank, in different roles since 2007 and is currently a co-executive director. She brings project development, implementation, replication, and scaling experience to the team, along with historical knowledge of restorative practice development, implementation, and sustainability within local high schools and across the city of Madison. She brings a rich history and knowledge of alternative economics, community building, and building grassroots networks of support to Flywheel's work. So thank you all so much for being here today. And I guess we can start with some questions here for you, each to answer. And the first question we have here is, what has your experience been like working to implement transformative justice approaches in schools? And if you could share a little bit about some of the successes and challenges that you had, that would be great.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'll just dive in here. As you heard, I actually attended an MMSD school, so I definitely used some personal experience within this role just to know what it is that I needed and making sure that I'm putting youth at the forefront of what I'm doing and asking them what they need. So with that being said, I've created some beautiful, beautiful relationships and connections with both students and staff, because with the work that we do, it's support for both. And I think that throughout my time trying to navigate, it's been difficult within the system that we have created without trying to without having to abolish some of the and unlearn some of the ways that things have been set up. So I definitely feel like there's a lot of beauty in what we do. There's a lot of connection and proactive work that we've been doing and creating a home base for these students, somewhere that they can come and check in daily, creating resources that they know that they have and also that parents and community can access, creating safe spaces for these students, as we know, trying to balance education through a pandemic and welcoming them back without that actual welcome. Expecting them to be able to go in and out of school and being able to learn at home and then pushing them right back into the building and understanding that they may need some time to transition. So creating spaces for that, working with them daily, making sure that they're having all of the resources that they need so that they don't end up in situations where they're having to call on others. I think that a lot of the challenges were more set in the systematic ways that things were set up, the not having the team support from certain staff at the schools, and also just the culture of policing being instilled from the ground up. So as I was mentioning, we need to abolish that culture. We need to completely remove these exclusionary practices and the ways of this power dynamic that is always happening, and remembering that the building and this school is for the students. It's not for us. It's supposed to be a place that is safe for them, a place that is created for them to have success. But as of yet, it hasn't been doing that. So I think that's what some of my biggest challenges have been. But with the beauty that I was mentioning, I've seen complete turnarounds in classrooms and hallways when staff are actually willing to commit to this work. So I've seen this work make amazing changes and reconnect people that you would never assume would ever be able to have an understanding. But using that groundwork of restorative justice has allowed space for that, creating these safe spaces for them to be welcomed back into school, or for them to process how they're feeling, has allowed them to be able to be educated and reached. If a student is in a space where they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen, they have to balance what's going on at home and with the pandemic and things like that, how can you actually reach them unless they've been able to release that, unless they've been able to be welcomed into that space, knowing that we're going to be patient, we're going to work with you, we're going to be understanding of what it is that you need. I think a lot of that lacks. And the fact that everything is under a time constraint when you're in school, you know, we don't have enough time, or we have to do this now. Everything is so reactive. It doesn't allow that proactive measure, or that building of rapport before something is on fire and you have to put the fire out. So I can keep going on and on. Again, the troubles was be like commitment, and we'd make a lot of leeway, or a lot of progression and groundwork with people. And then we may have turnovers where they aren't there the next year, or things are changing to where the leadership isn't as invested in this work as it was previously. So we may have gotten amazing results before, but then we have to start all over with new people who may not have the same beliefs. And I love welcoming new people into this work and enlightening them and educating them. But if they aren't willing to actually do the groundwork and fully commit to it, it won't be genuine and it won't work. And also rushing the process, because a lot of the times people think having one conversation that it's a one and done, when most of the time it's the tip of the iceberg that you're touching. So you have to know that it's going to be ongoing. These students are going to need daily or weekly check-ins. They're going to need people that are there for them in times of need and not pushing them away because there's not enough time. And with that, I will pass. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would like to answer next. The question was, what has been your experience working with implementing transformative justice in schools, and successes and challenges you've had?
I can go. Thanks, Alexis. That was great. Some things, you know, we've been working in the schools in Madison for a long time. Our experience, my experience, I'll speak for myself. My experience has been, it's been difficult. It's difficult to make transformative change within the institution, as Alexis was talking about. While there is a lot of opportunity for individual relationship and transformation, the systemic piece has been the most challenging. Some of that is associated with, it's restorative justice on top of a punitive system. It won't flourish and it won't transform. A culture of policing and a culture of punishment and exclusion and control, that's power over as opposed to power with, and restorative justice is about power with. And, you know, the challenging piece, Alexis touched on this as well, associated with making sure that everyone in the community, everyone in the school community has voice, whether that's youth or parents or staff in the building or everyone, and everyone can access restorative justice and everyone is accountable to each other. That has been some of the successes that we had last year. You know, we were implementing those pieces. A challenge is it's being set up within a structure that is very hierarchical and very top-down decision making. And so like Alexis was talking about, you know, if there's investment in leadership and there's space to do those kinds of things and there's investment from staff, then a lot of work can be done. But if there's not, or if there's transition, or if that changes, then that makes it difficult and you're not able to do it. And so it's, it's been, in some ways, the experience of trying to make change within an institution is brutal. It's brutal and it's demoralizing in some kinds of ways, to be honest, because it's interesting because there are so many people in the school community that know things need to change and see the things that they want to change, and they're invested in it. But then actually being able to implement some of those changes is where there's a lot of barriers that get into place. And because of those barriers and because of a huge variety of things, what people know we need to do doesn't actually translate into implementing those things. So yeah, I'll stop there for now, but thank you.
Yeah, I can hop in. Definitely appreciate what Lorrie and Alexis have shared, and share the sentiment that it has been very difficult, challenging, and taxing. I first learned about restorative justice when I was in high school, and received training from the YWCA at La Follette, and got my first experience, my toes wet, as a peer-to-peer or interpersonal restorative justice facilitator. That was back in 2012, and since then I've since deepened my understanding and unlearned a lot of things to take me from a believer in restorative justice to transformative justice. I think restorative justice, while necessary, it is a secondary form of justice in that it attempts to repair harm that has already occurred. Once harm is there, you can't take it back, and you can do everything you can to heal and repair that harm. Transformative justice, on the other hand, is attempting to make the community, environmental, and social conditions such that the amount of harm that we have to live with is reduced. And so, the successes are few and far between, and they're hard fought. And after they pass, you see just how limited in scope that they are. So we were able to do things like remove, a stationed police officer from school, but the philosophy of policing is still very present in our community and in our thinking. And to add to that, a school district is a downstream institution. We only exist in the legal confines and monetary confines of the state government and the federal government. And so, for example, there are things in state law where we are required to call the police, or where we're required to enact a punitive discipline strategy because it's written into state statute. And that has been very difficult. In a lot of ways, it feels like we are trying to solve national issues or social issues on a local level, when really we need that national commitment to change our culture. But I do believe in pockets of resistance. And not only that, we're dealing with manufactured scarcity. So I think our society is resource rich. For example, this county is way more willing to spend more money to send a child to the juvenile justice center than it is to send them to a day of school. There's a lot more resources that are pulling those children to the juvenile justice facility that are pulling them to school every day. And so we're dealing with the resource rich society, but the way we've allocated resources, our education systems are dealing with a manufactured scarcity. And sometimes it feels like that is leaving us to fight for scraps. And then the other thing I'll say is that as a school system, we are operating on inequity. We're operating on historical inequity that bears on our current reality. And we're dealing with, we're in a symbiotic system nature. So we're contending with housing insecurity and homelessness and housing inequity or injustice. We're contending with health injustice. we're contending with labor injustice that all of our families, our Black and brown families, are contending with. And as a school system, not only do we not always have the right tools to help people navigate those injustices, a lot of those tools are under-resourced. And I think the biggest challenge is caring for people's mental health, because we're exposed to all of that and we all want to change all of that. And sometimes the only thing we can do is try to enact some modicum of justice through our interpersonal relationships. So it is tough work, and it feels like these successes are few and far between, and they're hard fought. They're there every once in a while, but yeah, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, I really resonate with some of all of the things that have been shared so far. I just wanted to share a little bit about why Flywheel uses the term abolitionist restorative justice, and it kind of overlaps with a lot of what's been said already. But it gets us into a conversation about narratives, because what is it we're trying to transform? You know, when we talk about transformative justice, what narrative transformation is happening? Is one of the questions that I have for all of you here today, because one of the things that allows us to have some staying power in this work is when we're bringing that work into our personal experience. So each of us has some obligation to try to transform the way we operate within dominant narratives. What are the dominant narratives that are operating in our school system? One of them is that the curriculum that we have is suitable for Black and brown youth. That is suitable for any youth. It isn't. One of them is the misperception that we already are dealing within a democratic society. We aren't. Another is that the public education has the best interests of the people who are required to be there in mind. It doesn't. So there are a lot of narratives that we're forced to operate within that aren't being challenged at their root level. So if we really want to be transformative in this work, we really want to be abolitionists in this work, we have to be willing to take apart the narratives that we participate in from the ground up. So why do we accept public education the way it is with its curriculum and its overly white teaching staff and the racism and the structural oppression that exists within our school system? Why do we accept that narrative? Truly transformative action, abolitionist action, has to begin with deconstructing that participation, that accepting that language at face value. We have to be willing at a personal level, at an interpersonal level, and at an institutional level to deconstruct those narratives. Otherwise, what we're doing is performative. What we're doing is playing along and not challenging the primary assumptions on which these power structures are based. So I want to throw that out there as a way for us to approach abolitionism and to encourage everybody to lean into these. I know I threw out a lot of terms, but lean into that level of dismantling systemic oppression, personal blind spots, and how we interact and perpetuate dominance and white supremacist culture on a day-to-day basis. We can be truly transformative if we take all those levels into account and we question what we've been asked to accept at face value.
Thank you for that. Is there anything that you all want to add on to what each other has said?
I do think that what Dr. Brown just shared, particularly on the assumption that our public schools have the best interests of Black and brown students at heart, That's not, it depends on who you ask. It feels like an understatement to say that there is a cultural mismatch between the demographic of our teachers and the demographic of students. And that is another, again, it feels like an understatement, but another challenge in that a lot of teachers don't have a good understanding of the historical injustice and systemic injustice that we're dealing with. And for a lot of folks, yes, we have to have grace and patience. And, there's a willingness from a lot of people, and there's a unwillingness from a lot of people to do that learning. But we're starting from a base level of understanding for a lot of people in the education system. And that's another thing that I think about frequently, is even our victories in the moment can come with unintended consequences later down the line. So I'm speaking specifically to right now to Brown v. Board and the exodus of Black teachers after that decision came down, and how that's come to bear in society now, or on our public education system now. So yeah, those are very good thoughts to reflect on.
It makes me think of Mariame Kaba, who is a prison abolitionist, and she talked about, a common response to, the idea of prison abolition is, well, what about all the murderers? And so, but her response to that is, those folks would not have committed those murders if we had all of the resources that we needed systemically, in the first place. And so it's working from that end, as well as working from the idea of prison abolition, not just the idea, but the hopeful reality of that. And that's what one thing I kind of heard from you, Dr. Brown, is just looking at the entire system of things and how they all play a role. And that's, part of social work, which is looking at the systems and how they work together in institutions to prevent change from happening, and kind of what are the entry points that we can make change, with the goal of knowing that there's a bigger picture and multiple systems that we need to impact. So I definitely hear that, and I definitely have felt that as a school social worker at a middle school here in Madison, that sort of working with the idea of transformative and restorative justice alongside seeing, okay, but we still have suspensions as the thing. How do these two things work alongside each other? They don't. So how can we sort of navigate that, and kind of work on both and at the same time, work on ending suspensions while building up our culture and climate through transformative justice and restorative justice.
Is that a question for us?
Yeah, I'm putting it out there from me, and I have your other questions here too. Just curious.
Yeah, I think that has been where the rubber meets the road in our, as one of the challenges in our work, because people do operate under the assumption that they can work side by side. And that's something Alexis pointed out earlier is, the punitive and the policing culture is not conducive to this type of transformation. And so, and that scares people. People are terrified of that. Right now, there is a very legitimate and praiseworthy effort to keep cops out of our schools. And unfortunately, even though we won the battle of getting them out of the schools, and you should thank Freedom Inc., Urban Triage, and the youth squad at Freedom Inc. for leading that work. For years, they showed up at school board meetings and demanded this for many, many years. And finally, after the killing of George Floyd and the uprising across the world around that, the school board was willing to listen. And they got rid of the SROs, and there's still pressure to put them back. So there's a movement right now to keep them out. But as was pointed out earlier by Savion, the philosophy of policing hasn't changed. And the deep-rooted belief in policing and punishment hasn't changed. So what we're dealing with is adults in the building who are ill-equipped to deal with our kids. They are contributing to a police to prison pipeline, and they don't even realize it, most of them. So, but they maintain their jobs even after year, what they're doing is contributing to the school to prison pipeline. They still keep their jobs. And that's why I say public education is not having our kids' interest, their best interest at heart. Because these people who are over disciplining our kids, who are participating in violence against our kids, are keeping their jobs, and that's not a problem. That has become a norm. So the disparities that I read when I took this job a few years ago between Black and brown students and white kids persist, even though there have been some minor changes, the overarching disparities persist. And the people who are producing those disparities have kept their jobs. The principal, Matt Thompson at La Follette High School, who disrupted and ended our work at La Follette High School, has a job. He refused to participate in a restorative conversation with us. He refused to talk to us before he did that. He just unilaterally ended our work. That's a problem. He still has a job after all of that. So the district allows this person to continue what he's doing. He has had no reprimand. And just like that, he snaps his fingers and we're gone. So I won't forget that. And the district is responsible for allowing that to happen. And when I say these schools aren't fit for our kids are excellent, brilliant, wonderful human beings, and these schools are not fit for them. And I stand by that. And I would love it if somebody could disprove it.
Yeah, the piece around accountability, like there needs to be accountability. A lot of the work that we've been doing is associated with 360-degree accountability. Everyone is accountable to each other. And, some of what Dr. Brown was referring to before in terms of like, if a student feels harmed in a school, how is that teacher accountable to that student? And historically in our work, and even currently, the student can't refer an adult to restorative justice to be accountable for the harm that they feel happened in that situation. And so those are some pieces that need to really shift associated with accountability. Everybody needs to be accountable to each other, and the institution needs to be accountable to the work and to the community as well. And we haven't seen that.
I'm going to turn to the next question here that really relates well to what we've all been talking about. Y'all have been talking about here. So what do you see as critical elements that are needed in order to transform the culture of policing and transform school culture?
Well, my first thought is just like Dr. Brown was mentioning, using the transformative and abolitionist piece is essential because, like we were mentioning, there's no room for both. And so we must have people in positions of power, the district, everyone, all the decision makers need to have the belief in this work and need to fully be committed. And like Lorrie, you were mentioning that 360-degree accountability, even going as far as our partnerships, the partnerships that they're making with us and with restorative justice workers, the commitment, it needs to be transparent. It needs to be genuine. People need not to co-opt what restorative justice is and take the bits and pieces that they want to use or that work in their benefit, but then actually remove the essential parts that are is needed for progression and needed for the actual culture change. I also feel like they lack the space to be transparent. I think so often that we are in meetings and we're discussing the progression and discussing needs, but these needs aren't being met. People are making promises that they aren't fully even able to do. So it's just a lot of talking, a lot of meetings, but no action. So that transformative piece, it's needed. It's like, if you don't have that, then, your word means nothing. And I also feel like they need education. They need to educate their staff in ways that allow them to have the skill set to understand their students, to understand culture, to, if they're having a trouble with a student, to not put them out of class and they're just sitting in the hall, or putting them off on the next Black staff member that they think can handle them. Educating white staff to know how to deal in these situations, or having the support for them as well. I think those are all essential and critical pieces to actually transform what we're trying to do, and getting rid of the BEP, not falling back on that. And that needs to be holistically. That needs to be something that all the schools are doing, not just one. Yeah, I'll pass for now.
Do you want to clarify what the BEP is to folks who might not know?
I'm sorry. The
okay.
behavior education plan. So that is what they use if and when something happens, and they have different levels and stages of what that is. But this year within La Follette, after all the amazing groundwork we've done, they had restorative justice as a mere slideshow, just a very small section of what the BEP was. However, they were not supposed to use the BEP whatsoever. It should have been replaced, not in addition to restorative justice. So I think the fact that staff members are so comfortable and used to that, they get afraid of what to do after. So that's where that education piece is needed. They need to know that the approach that restorative justice allows you to use will get you greater and much more reach with your students, and connection and understanding with your students, than exclusionary practices and suspending and, sending people to in-school suspension, things like that. I think they are trying to hire Black staff to, quote unquote, make it better or fill the shoes, but it's not being utilized in a proper way, because they're hiring Black staff to do the same work, to perpetuate harm. So it's even worse now, because a lot of people are co-opting what restorative justice is, and they're not utilizing it in the right ways. It's all to benefit them. It's all about the power dynamic. And if you're coming in their building trying to do things that aren't how they want it to be done, then you won't be welcomed. And that goes for staff, students, us, everyone. I feel that it is definitely, it's at the point where, even if it's a parent, I've seen staff turn parents away because they're too problematic, or they speak too passionately about what it is they're needing, when that's the opposite of what we need. We need the community in the building to make this change. We need the community's voice. We need the people that are most affected by all the things that are happening to be able to be in these spaces to discuss things. But instead, they only pick the people of power that are not affected, that don't even understand the culture of Black and Brown youth, to make decisions that affect them the most. It's completely backwards. And that is why we work so hard to uplift youth voice, and to make sure that they are in these spaces being heard, and to make sure that we're making them visible in any way we can. And also, if that means outside of the school, we'll be working with students, then that's what's going to happen too. We definitely need community to make this change. So we need to build there as well, and welcome them in. So sorry, I just went off on a tangent.
No, and I just want to add to something you said, Alexis. I think it is very much about community in those buildings. You know, it is very much about that. And we've always pushed that because it's never been the case that kids, if it's particularly necessary in a situation where you have such a tremendous racial disparity. I didn't mean to turn off my camera. There's a tremendous racial disparity between, and it's now let me turn it on. At any rate, I'm not sure what happened there. Because the staff is so white in our schools, and we're not going to change that overnight. So bring in community, bring them in the right way, not to support an agenda of policing, which has been done as Alexis has alluded to, but to support the restorative, the transformative, the abolitionist work that needs to be done. I'll just stop there.
That reminds me of the quote from Dr. Bettina Love about education can't save us, we have to save education. And, with a district that like brings Dr. Love in to speak, I think that's something that is, I just wanted to, it just made me think about it. I third the importance of bringing community in. We definitely need community involved in making transformation. And similar to what Alexis and others were saying about, we have to have those that are being most impacted in this situation leading this work.
Something I'll say is that we need to have a full conception of what the system is. What I mean by that, and I alluded to this in my previous comments, is that education or local public school districts are downstream institutions. Our funding formula is already set by state law and federal law. We have pockets of money that can only be used for certain things. We have policies that are set in stone by federal and state statute. And so the autonomy of local districts and the resources of local districts are severely limited in terms of their discretion. So for example, when it comes to resources and money allocations, our tax authority is set in stone by the by state statute. And so I'll be honest with you, I don't know a public school district in Wisconsin, mind you, the same state as Act 10, that has the ability to fully fund initiatives to attempt to achieve transformative justice. And so I think it is critical that we understand, and so I agree, we need every single shoestring in the closet in the community on the table put in service to trying to achieve this. Because I'll be honest with you, with our taxing authority, we won't come close to it. And, I try to be transparent about that. I try not to oversell that, but we fully need the community behind us. And we also need to not be, because of we're a downstream institution, it puts us in a pressure cooker fighting amongst ourselves for scraps. We need to be united and advocating at the state and federal level that, like, look, our local public schools and local public school districts are strapped for everything right now. I think about teachers right now and about the teacher shortage. And I acknowledge and understand and agree with everything that's been said about and how our current stock of teachers do not meet the needs of students. But I'm also looking at some public data showing that 47% of teachers are thinking about leaving the profession or thinking about leaving their jobs. 36% are thinking about leaving the profession entirely. And that's on top of an already decreasing teacher supply. And so we are in a generational challenge where there will be no easy solution or quick solution either. It's going to take a generation or two to heal it, if that. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I have one other question here before we get into questions from the audience, but I just think about one of the biggest resources that I see is time. And I just know that within my school, we had homeroom, and that was a time to do community building circles. But if there were any circles that students requested around addressing any sort of social conflicts, we would use their specials classes, like art, band, to be able to hold those circles so that it wouldn't interfere with academic time. But the problem with that is those teachers obviously weren't very happy either. And just the time issue, and also wanting to hold multiple circles with a group of students, because that, sometimes, like you can't have social emotional learning happen overnight or in 1 hour in one circle. But teachers, saying, they need to also have class. And, part of me feels like, just in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that we need to have that time to address their social emotional learn, those needs, because if they're still in conflict, they're not thinking about art class, right? But on the other hand, there's, standardized testing, and, all schools getting judged by these numbers. And so administrators being under pressure to perform in that way. And there just doesn't seem to be that time that is being, I think, prioritized for restorative and transformative justice. And I really wish there was that prioritization of that time. That's just something that I have seen personally. And the last question here is so what types of investments do create safe schools?
An initial thing, and I'll probably come back, initial thought I had was, and this is a realization I've come to from my experience on the board, in terms of the board's formal authority as budget and policy, is that culture eats policy for breakfast every day. If we don't have a culture that believes in a policy, it unfortunately will not matter. If we don't have the people who have the culture and that reflects the spirit of a policy being made, it will not matter. And so I've often thought, how can a policy push the culture, or more broadly, what influences a culture? What will help people unlearn the philosophy of policing? And those are the investments that I've thought about.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Savion, because even though we're within a system that at best is gradualist, when you have people who understand what's needed, at least things are moving forward. We had Devon LaRosa at La Follette, and he understood the culture piece. And so a lot of our time in the initial moments were building trust with staff who, quite frankly, after what educators have been through in this state, there's very little trust in that building. And so he understood the importance of building a community of trust and having all these discussions about values and how we show up. He didn't even want to use the term buy-in. He didn't even want to use the term belief. He wanted to talk about change. And he gave us the leeway we needed to bring people into conversations around what it takes to move our mindset. So if we want to think about how we police each other, that's an excellent place to start in thinking about how we police children, because policing is an American tradition. Right? It goes way back, and it's very deeply rooted in white supremacist culture. And so the invitation was for all of us to look at how we do policing, right? How do we recreate power imbalances? How do we build democracy in the classroom as opposed to that? Because one of the ways you level the playing field is that you build in the structures in your classroom that will allow the youth to have a more active role in creating the environment that they spend their time in. And that's creating democracy in the classroom. That's shifting the power in a way that policing becomes less and less possible. And so that's what we were doing. Lorrie mentioned the universal request form earlier, I believe. And that was one of the ways that you're putting power into the hands of everybody in that school community equally. That's how you cut through policing. Nobody's policing anybody else. Everybody's looking out for everybody else. You know, everybody's trying to restore with equal footing in that process, with an equal voice in that process. And when you create that parity, policing becomes less possible. You're cutting through our mindset around policing. And I don't want to take too much time on that, but I really wanted to reiterate that the culture shift is what we were working on and where we hit up against some of the deep power imbalances in that school, and that was a no-no. But that is exactly the way we have to go, you know.
Yes, I agree. I love what you're saying, Dr. Brown. I love what we all have added. And yeah, definitely investing in yourself, you know, starting with you, working on unlearning and relearning what's needed as far as your approach and your understanding of each student. I feel like if all staff were able to do that, that would be great. And of course, then we would come in and educate them more on what true abolitionist and transformative restorative justice is. So they need to unpack and then learn a lot of things. So I think investing in education, investing in, as we were mentioning, relationships with community and parents, also investing in spaces. Is that the question we're on? I think, I'm sorry. Investing in spaces within the school and outside of the school for this work. Because we, as a restorative justice practitioner, I cannot stop being a restorative justice practitioner once I leave. I have to live that. I have to embody those values in order to be true to what I do. So I think it's important to utilize that throughout conversations that you're having with colleagues, with students, when you're educating, all of that. So investing in the knowledge that you have to keep learning more. There's never a year that I haven't learned another part of restorative justice. I'm constantly learning and growing. And I think that's necessary for everyone. And as I was mentioning, just them creating spaces for that, because as we know, time is one of our biggest issues. So making sure that we're creating avenues and resources for ourselves and for our students to, you know, process different things and be in spaces with other people where we can connect and then come back together and do this work amazingly. I find so often that in schools, people are out in silos. So there may be this one row of classrooms that are really invested in restorative justice, but then there's others that are not. So we all need to be on the same page and just being consistent in that work that we're doing. And I have a few other things, but I want us to have enough time for everyone, so I will pass.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything additional to add other than what's been said around the, you know, investment in time, investment in sharing power, investment in youth, investment in relationships, you know, investment in abolishing things that can be abolished within that to make space for people.
Yeah, just to add a few more things. Investment in the psychological and physical safety of Black and Brown children. So avenues for students to express themselves through art, meaningful inputs for children to have an autonomy over their own education and their own learning plan, so they don't feel like they're being indoctrinated. Or there's a difference between receiving education and receiving schooling. Schooling is like indoctrination, preparing you for the economy. Education is like giving you tools to determine your own destiny and fate. So leaning towards education, investment in early childhood education, because that is a driver of many injustices and inequities. And we know that our students are experiencing injustice, who are Black and Brown, experiencing injustice outside of the school wall. So can school be a space where they can process what they're experiencing out in society? Because this, school is just one cog of an unjust society right now. And while a school can be a safe place, ideally, a school can maybe be a safe place for a Black and Brown child. Unfortunately, will not change the fact that they might experiencing homelessness outside of it. So what can a school do to provide a safe space for that student? So those are just a few things, but I think, the more meaningful control a child can have of their own education, so they don't feel like they're being taught to, that they're being disciplined to, that they don't feel like they're being a problem that's solved by, a white savior, the better and more transformative.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah, go ahead. I just want to, after you, and then we'll get into our questions from the audience.
I was just going to add a brief moment of acknowledging that the leadership has a major role in how things go. So just investing in leadership that either already has restorative justice background and continuing education on that, or leaders who actually are committed to this work. I think it should be, if MMSD as a school district is really committed to this work, then the people that they put in leadership positions should be as well. And that should be mandatory. That should be written into everything. And also investing in reworking the system that is current, meaning getting rid of all of the BEP, the behavior education plan and exclusionary, all of that, and rewriting and reworking it to where restorative justice is at the core, the top, the bottom, the side, everywhere. And it was again adding to what you were mentioning too, Savion. So I agree, and I'll stop there.
And I just want to add one more piece to this too, as well. Like Savion was talking about how I don't know how you phrased it, but we're kind of we're in the lower realm or the lower tier of a downstream funding situation, right? Like from federal down to local. I think that's what you meant. And I think that I think it really is helpful for us to think about public education in the same framework that we're looking at other institutions that came out of efforts to build a democratic society. Because right now, what we're looking at is the decline of those institutions. It's not just public education. And so all these efforts to go back to business as usual or go back to normal really need to be thought. There's no back to normal right now. We have to reinvent ourselves right now in a way that will sustain us through the next few generations. So yes, public education is falling apart. Yes, the infrastructure is falling apart. Yes, the courts and the legal systems and people trying to go beyond the rule of law. All of those things have been attacked by a pretty flimsy 4-year term of Trump, but it didn't begin with Trump. And you have to look at how the decline of our would-be democratic institutions is impacting us right now and not want to go back to normal. Realize that we need something better in its place right now. We should not be trying to rebuild what didn't work before.
Okay, thank you so much. I will start with the first question we got here. What ideas do you have about how to practice restorative justice when we are currently facing multiple crises with our city, school, and student communities, especially when the mental health team at school is burnt out and under-resourced. It's hard to imagine an overlap where crisis management and restorative justice can intersect.
Well, I think right now you have to acknowledge that the schools have been in crisis for a long time. Because of the pandemic, it pushed us out into a visible expression of that crisis. But the crisis has been going on for a minute. So what we have to do is sort of take a time out and get a fresh start. If the level of chaos and burnout and the brain drain that we're experiencing in this district right now is something that's, if we're going to stem the tide of that, people need to be willing to say, let's shut it down and reboot, right? Shut it down and then get hundreds of circles going all over this city for a repair process where we find out what the real needs are and how to meet them. It's not going to be met within the school district's budget. You're going to have to bring in agencies that care about kids from all across this town and get them to work together and do the reboot. Don't expect kids to pile more on top of what they're already dealing with. Take the time out to say, what do you need? How can we help? Let them tell you. Don't assume you know, and stop trying to put the lid on all that pain.
Thank you. I wholeheartedly agree. And I feel like that's been the need for a long time, as you said, Dr. Brown, about before this pandemic. I mean, to slow down. The next question we have here is, how do you address individuals who feel as though putting an emphasis on race in curriculums will create more of a divide?
Yeah, that's a boy. Yeah. You know, I can't publicly speak on personnel issues, but if you don't feel like educating about racial injustice and what to do something about it, I don't think you have any business being a teacher, being in a school right now. I'll leave it at that.
I agree. If you cannot be, I don't know if I want to say selfless, but I mean, it's just a person's fragility, and that is just the worst way to use it. I feel that if you are a white person, you should be able to allow the space for someone to talk about how they feel and how traumatic, or how, just how they process things. I don't think it should be taken as a moment of discomfort unless you aren't ready to face reality. Like I can't understand that because I'm a Black person. So I find that I have to so often be the interrupter anyway, right? I have to say what no one else wants to say all the time as the Black woman in the room. So if I have to deal with that, the least you can do is give me the space for it. Because no one else is going to step up for us, right? Unless we're doing it, unless our allies and our co-conspirators. But if you are, as Savion mentioned, if you're in a school that's going to be diverse and you're teaching and educating students that do not look like you, the least you can do is give them the space to be able to speak their truth. Whether it doesn't sound good, whether it sounds great, you should be able to give them that space as an educator. And I say to someone who isn't ready for that to start unlearning, unpacking, and working on your white fragility. If that means attending other conferences or talking to other people who maybe are more comfortable, then do that. But you have to self-reflect and start somewhere with you. That person has a lot of inner work to do. So if you're able and willing to continue to educate and enlighten them, do so. But also to other Black people, I feel that we do take that on a lot, and it can be our job. But if it's something that's draining you or something that becomes too much to carry, I don't think you should save your energy. You should protect yourself from that, because we are always in the position of having to correct someone or tell someone this or that because they didn't understand the culture of a Black student that they were working with in school. Because as a black restorative justice coordinator, I would always have to step in when a white staff member didn't understand something someone said, or they were loud. I thought they were fighting, when really that's just naturally how they were playing. So it's moments like that where it's like, you have to realize that you don't understand everything. So it's either allow someone to help you, or you have to start helping yourself, or both. Most likely it's going to be both. But again, like Savion said, if you can't allow the space for that type of discussion, then you don't belong in a classroom. I agree.
And I think, and you have insight into this probably, Savion, is just a lot that's going on in our school board meetings lately. White parents and white school board members and other, wherever, being the ones who are driving that, in addition to educators, like you said, Alexis. The next question here.
Can I ask a question about that? Angela, are you saying that white parents are showing up at school board meetings and complaining about whatever? Can you say more?
Oh, I mean, just noticings in the news about white parents going to school boards and saying, I don't want this book taught. I don't want this in my school. Using the term critical race theory without even quite knowing what it means, that kind of stuff.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll add, in Madison, a place that is allegedly liberal or progressive, and a lot of hyper-educated university folks. A lot of folks are for, so-called racial equity in theory or on paper. When it comes to practice, when the rubber meets the road, where we actually have to reallocate some resources, whether it be teachers or parents, that's when the pushback starts. Yeah.
And again, Dane County has some of the worst racial disparities in the whole nation. So there's no not addressing it. There's no not doing that work.
This next question here is, what do you feel is the role of white educators that serve predominantly Black and brown students? Should we, and I think by we, the individual means white person, be thinking about stepping down and making way for others who want to serve our students and also look like our students?
Well, somebody mentioned Bettina Love's book. If you haven't read that, read it and bring it to school with you every day. But I really feel like that's just the tip of the iceberg. But abolitionist education, there's a website. White teachers should take it that it's not optional to deal with how your white privilege impacts your ability to do your job. I don't think you should abandon schools. I think you should immerse yourself in things like the work that Bettina Love brought forward. Immerse yourself in anti-racism work in town. Immerse yourself in self-education about the people you're teaching. And consider team teaching and inviting Black people in to come and team teach with you, so that we don't have to wait until we get the right number of Black and brown teachers for there to be Black and brown educators in front of our kids. That could be done tomorrow. Make friends and build a cohort of Black and brown educators, even if you have to bring them in on Zoom from California or DC. Get those people in front of those kids. The statistics show immediate impact and also long-term gains for kids who are taught by people who look like them. Doesn't have to be every teacher that looks like them. It just needs to be some. There's one Black teacher at La Follette, and there's 1,600 kids. How many of them are going to have a Black teacher before they graduate? So there's something educators can do. They can get those Black and brown folks in front of those kids and they can educate themselves. And we've been talking about that all along, but I want to reiterate that.
Yeah. Just to piggyback off that, thank you. You know, at some level, a good teacher is a good teacher. I think the qualities that make up a good teacher are an ability to reflect, understand your positionality, and try to, you know, immerse yourself in the culture or the demographic of your students. And I think anyone can do that. As a male, I attempt to do that, you know, with regard to gender. And I think what we are striving for is not a mathematical equity where we think, oh, job's done. We have a school that is 25% Black. Our teachers are 25% Black. Job's done. We're not striving for mathematical equity. We're striving for justice. And I think that's an important distinction.
Thank you. The next question is, do you all have any tips on how to participate in deconstructing false narratives within systems while also maintaining partnerships with colleagues/administrators? I work within the child welfare system where false narratives abound, and I've struggled with becoming too combative when trying to do this dismantling work from within.
I don't want to like jump in on the first person every time, but can you reread the question and then I will defer to my colleagues to go first on this one.
Sure. Do you have any tips on how to participate in deconstructing false narratives within systems while also maintaining partnerships with colleagues/administrators? I work within the child welfare system where false narratives abound, and I've struggled with becoming too combative when trying to do this dismantling work from within.
That is a good question. You know, I don't know. Sometimes I often have to remind myself I'm not here to coddle anyone or make anyone feel comfortable.
Yes, I'll piggyback off that. I agree. I've had to learn to not be so focused on how I'm going to make this adult feel when correcting them if they are perpetuating harm against youth. At the end of the day, it's about the youth, right? It's about the kids, and that's what we're here for. That's what the building is for the youth. So if you feel like there's something that needs to be addressed, I would say make sure your approach is in a way that you think is best. You know, whatever your relationship is with that person, you know, you may have to adjust your approach, but make sure you say what needs to be said. I find that I have less regret when I just dive in, I just say it. And usually when you're working with someone who is understanding or who is actually trying to work with you, they'll be understanding too. And if they aren't, then you'll continue, you know, talking about it. But the combative part I know is tough sometimes. For me specifically as a woman and as a Black woman, you know, I'm always the angry Black lady, you know, so I've had to deal with that a lot too, but I've just turned it into power, because now I can use that, my voice, and I'm advocating and speaking up for people who aren't as able or willing. And I think it's just about approach. It's about building rapport with whomever it is that you're working with so they can understand you on a deeper level. But like Savion said, it's also about maybe you won't be best friends with this person after this conversation, but at least they'll know where you stand, and maybe they'll have a change of heart or at least a second thought about what it is that they're doing. So yeah, I would just say approach, educating yourself and educating them, giving them books to read, reading books for yourself. But also if they're like one of those data people, show them some data, show them a case study. There are people out in Oakland where they had major gun violence and crime and like gang wars, and they don't have police in their schools anymore. They have restorative justice, and they are doing amazingly. They are excelling with restorative justice in other places, and there's data to show it. So if you got to dig that up, do that too. That's what I recommend.
Yeah. And sometimes you can't, sometimes those approaches will work and sometimes those approaches won't work. And sometimes you need to just stand in your values and speak truth to power in whatever the situation is. And sometimes you will lose relationships because of it. And you have to be willing to do that at certain points.
I know one thing that I have told colleagues, and I know I'm not on this panel, but is that I invite you to correct me. I want you to correct me. So maybe just coming at a place of like, this is what I, feel free to correct me at any time. And I am correcting you right now on this. I think just making sure they know it's going to go both ways. This next question here, as much as I support RJ and TJ, I know that I still am maintaining or marinating in white punitive systems. How do I start to undo this in myself? And many don't even know how they contribute to it daily or don't think it's wrong.
Well, I think one of the ways we teach about this in our workshops is to help people understand that the work isn't really that about constantly looking at the final goal. The work is the biggest hurdle is learning that change is going to be much more possible if you understand the importance of an ongoing commitment, a day-to-day commitment. And to me, I don't care who comes to my workshops, when they come to the workshops, if they leave with that idea that, oh, now I understand that this is every day I walk out my door, I am an abolitionist. Or at least I'm aspiring to become an abolitionist. You won't be the first few years probably, but that aspiration is what we need. It's not that now you're perfect at it. It's that I know that for the rest of my life, there will not be a day when this is not in my radar. And that's what it means to show up as a co-conspirator. Because when Black people walk out their doors, when Native American people walk out their doors, when poor people walk out their doors, when gay people walk out their doors, they have a set of challenges that middle-class, cisgendered white folks don't. Right? And so whenever we're trying to be an ally or a co-conspirator to someone, whenever we're trying to aspire to the role of an abolitionist, that day-to-day commitment is what matters most. It's not that, oh, I got it, I'm gonna get it. No, that is not it. It's every day I take a step. Every day I'm walking alongside the people who I'm trying to be a co-conspirator with in the way I show up.
Yeah, it is. I think embrace the lifelong journey. There is no black and white. I will, I think there's something to be said that, like any profession, this requires constant reflection and continuous improvement. And so really embracing that reflection aspect and the journey aspect.
Okay, the next question here is, how would you recommend that parents, both individually and as groups who support these changes, engage both with the district as a whole, but also with individual schools? As we know, there can be huge differences between buildings in the district, when often there is that pushback that was mentioned. where are the points of entry that parents and community should focus on?
You should be asking the same questions we're asking of the school board around where are the textbooks, where are the curricula, where are the teachers, where is the money, where is the community engagement, where is where are these things? And I think it's very valuable to build alliances with Black and brown parents and do that work with them. But there are also organizations in this community that are working on this. Call them up and say, how can I help? We all know Freedom Inc. is knee deep in this, if not more. We all know Urban Triage has been working on this. We all know that there's many organizations in this town who aren't accepting what's being laid down. And so put your energy and you can also support Flywheel, right? You can come to Flywheel and say, how can I help your work, right? What do you need to push this, to make this progressive push more successful? And so find the where you resonate and dig in and help the folks who are leading some of that work. And if you see an area that doesn't have anybody working on that, start a project.
Yeah, please hold us accountable. Also, we need to hear your voice. The board, believe me, the board will always hear from police advocates. The board will always hear from wealthy parents who want every opportunity and resource for their child to opportunity hoard. The board is frequently hearing from people who are anti-mask and anti-vaccine. And we need to hear y'all's voices. Also, please vote in the local school board elections, ask hard questions of the candidates, and finally, please consider running. Historically, the school board has been for old, white, retired people, particularly women. And we need more Black parents, Black folks on school boards across the country.
Okay, this next question is somebody who is interning at an MMSD high school and is noticing that though there is an RJ coach that was hired and a peace room that was created, that it's being underutilized and seemingly ignored by administration. So the question is, how can I or others push toward using this resource more?
I guess I have a question, but I can comment as well. My question would be, do they have a process? What would it take for someone to say that we need this space? Like, is there a request that needs to be made, or is it that the teacher needs to say they need a different space? Like, how do you lead up to that, utilizing that room? And if that isn't something that's in place, then I would recommend getting something in place. That way, it's documented that students are needing support, but it's also using it as a resource. And that way, what types of needs are happening in the building. What's happening in the space also. And the more that it's began to be used by others, more people will join in, hopefully. So I would say for any student that maybe you're working with, or student that you see needs more support, start with them, and maybe start using the space if possible, or is it that you have to request it? So I have a bit of question, but I would just put that out there to staff and to leadership that, this could be an amazing space for circles, for processing, or for, releasing things as a staff. Even it could be used for staff and students, mostly students, but of course staff need to know that restorative justice is a resource for them too. So if they need to talk to their student, or if they need a space for their student to be able to work on something or work through something, then that should be offered. I feel maybe you could offer it even. I'm not sure, but I would definitely start bringing up that you could use that space. Oh, and I'll stop. Sorry.
One thing that I'd add to that we've seen quite often is that, and this was touched on earlier in terms of time, but one of the things that we've seen over time is the development of a space, but not having a person coordinating the space, or having a person who's doing restorative justice, but it's on top of a bunch of other things that are happening. So they're not able to fully invest in it, and they don't have the capacity to do it. And then those things get underutilized. And the same thing with, like, even though a school may have a restorative justice coach, oftentimes what we've seen is, and we've touched on before, is like, if there's the restorative justice coaches sometimes are being looped in, or can be looped into more of like a behavior response role, or a security type of role. So they might be dealing with like individual situations as opposed to fully utilizing a restorative space, when that's a huge resource that school could be using. So I would recommend, like, that is again why it's so important to have community coming into the school, because community coming into that space, we're not under the same kind of time restrictions. We don't have the same amounts of things that we're trying to juggle, and it's coming in with an equal, there's not a huge power differential in the same kind of way there is between a staff and a student, et cetera, et cetera. So I would recommend advocating for community to be able to get some training and get in that space and work with students and in that building, and students to get some training to be able to utilize that space as well.
Yeah, Lorrie, and just to add to that quickly, that is a huge accountability piece when you have community people in there versus MMSD employees. There's some community vision and their particular perspective being brought to bear on what they see happening, that where there is that power dynamic of being an MMSD employee doesn't exist. And I think that's equally important, just to add that to what you're saying.
Thank you so much for everything you've shared, all the knowledge that you're sharing today. That is actually kind of wrapping it up for us today. And I don't know if anybody has any very last words that y'all want to put out there before some concluding remarks. All right.
No, thank you, everyone. I'm just so grateful you all are here today. I love sharing this type of information, and we are here in the community if you need us.
Yes, look us up. We hope some of you will reach out to us and want to get involved with the work Flywheel is doing as well. So because that's where we're putting our energy, and if this is important to you, look us up.
Please consider visiting a school this month to read your heart out, and all the ensuing months too, to read your heart out.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right. So I do want to let everyone know that I'm going to be putting an evaluation in the Q&A for folks that you can fill out now if you have the time, but there will also be an email that will be coming later today if you want to fill it out later. And for those of you requesting CEUs when registering, you will receive that in the email. And at 2 o'clock, we will have our closing session of the conference, a conversation between Oceana Sawyer and Ali Muldrow. We hope you can make that, and I will put the link to that in the Q&A. So thank you so much.